Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ankur Chaudhary. I work as a policy specialist for Asia Pacific at the Good Food Institute APAC, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today to today's webinar organized under the APAC Regulatory Coordination Forum. The APAC Regulatory Coordination Forum was established in 2023 as a formal mechanism for continuous and systematic uh, cross-border dialogue between companies, industry associations, think tanks, government agencies, and food regulators across the region. The forum was set up jointly by APAC SCA and GFI APAC with a clear objective to support safe, science-based, and efficient pathways to market for cultivated food products across Asia Pacific. The webinar today will be in three parts. I'll start with policy and regulatory developments in APAC, followed by a fireside chat between Peter Yu and Lisa Kelly. The third and the final segment will be moderated by Kalissa with Dr. Fernando and Dr. Kim. Few housekeeping things to start with. The meeting will be recorded and we'll share the meeting recording with all registered participants as well as put it up on our YouTube channel. We'll try to adhere to the timings as much as possible. Please use the Q&A chat box for any questions during the webinar. We'll try to take up as many questions as possible. And if there are any questions which remain unanswered, we'll try to respond via emails. With that, let me start. Today's session provides a regional overview of key policy and regulatory developments shaping the alternative protein landscape in APAC with some global context where relevant. In my presentation, I'll look at four things in particular. First is how regulatory systems for novel foods are evolving globally and in our region, how the alternative protein sector has changed over the last decade, why governments are increasingly treating alternative proteins as part of the new industrial bioeconomy, and finally, we'll touch on two important regulatory signals. One is regulatory sandboxes and halal standards, particularly Malaysia's recent fatwa. Before diving in, just a brief word on who we are. The Good Food Institute APAC is headquartered in Singapore and is part of a global network of alternative protein think tanks operating across 6 regions worldwide. Our work spans policy, corporate engagement, and science and technology, and it is 100% powered by philanthropy. Let's begin with a quick global snapshot of novel food regulations because APAC developments don't happen in isolation. We see that Singapore continues to play a global leadership role with a clear pre-market approval system under the Singapore Food Agency and early approvals for cultivated meat products dating back to 2020. In contrast, jurisdictions like the European Union have a centralized but a comparatively lengthy approval process, typically taking between 18 months to 3 years, though approvals apply across all 27 member states. Currently, there are no products approved in the EU by the EFSA. The UK has taken steps to accelerate its system, including establishing a regulatory sandbox for cultivated meat and has already authorized a cultivated pet food ingredient. In the United States, fermentation-derived products have largely used the GRA's pathways, while cultivated meat received federal approval in 2023 through a joint FDA-USDA process. In APAC specifically, Australia and New Zealand through FASANs have approved both fermentation-derived and cultivated products. Japan and China yet do not have a formal novel food regulatory framework for cultivated meat, but both are actively developing guidance within existing systems. The key takeaway here is that while regulatory models differ, there is now clear global precedent that approval is possible, repeatable, and science-based. To the next slide. To understand why regulators are seeing increasing engagement today, it's helpful to reflect on how dramatically the sector has evolved. In 2016, there had only ever been 2 cultivated meat conferences globally and almost no dedicated academic field building. Fast forward to today, we see dozens of scientific conferences, hundreds of peer-reviewed publications annually, and alternative protein research embedded in leading universities worldwide. Public funding has also shifted significantly from essentially zero government support a decade ago to mainstream public R&D investment across major economies, including many here in APAC. To the next slide. From a regulatory perspective, perhaps the most important shift is that we have moved from theoretical debate about whether approval was even possible to validated regulatory pathways with multiple cultivated meat products already approved globally. At the same time, Private investment has scaled, and critically, we now have third-party scientific validation from institutions such as UNEP, which is United Nations Environment Program, recognizing alternative proteins as relevant to climate, biodiversity, and food security outcomes. This broader validation matters because it increasingly places alternative proteins not just within food policy, but within national sustainability, industrial, and innovation strategies. To the next slide. This brings us to a key strategic shift we are seeing globally. Alternative proteins are being positioned as part of the bio-industrial economy. In India, the new Bio E3 policy explicitly identifies alternative protein as one of six focus areas for high-performance biomanufacturing. In Japan, food tech has been elevated to a national policy priority under the new administration, building a significant bioeconomy investment. And in China, the 14th 5-year plan positions biomanufacturing, microbial fermentation, and synthetic biology as core future industry. What's notable here is that food innovation is no longer being treated solely as an agricultural issue. It's increasingly framed as industrial strategy, economic competitiveness, and technological leadership issue. To the next slide. Alongside policy frameworks, we are also seeing direct public investment in biomanufacturing capacity. Australia's Build Your BioFuture program offers what we often describe as a biomanufacturing slipstream, providing companies access to integrated design, build, test, scale infrastructure through public agencies like CSIRO. In the US, BioMade represents a $1 billion public-private partnership backed by the Department of Defense to strengthen domestic bioindustrial manufacturing. And in Europe, the 2025 bioeconomy strategy includes substantial funding for fermentation technologies and a dedicated EU biotech and biomanufacturing hub. For regulators, this trend is important because it means more products, more applications, and greater regulatory volume in the coming years. To the next slide. And against this backdrop, some governments are experimenting with regulatory innovation tools. The UK's Cultivated Meat Regulatory Sandbox is designed to strengthen regulatory scientific capacity while allowing safe, controlled innovation. In South Korea, North Gyeongsang Province has established a regulatory-free special zone, enabling companies to conduct proof of concept work and accelerate R&D under defined conditions. These approaches are not about lowering safety standards. Rather, they are about ensuring regulators can keep pace with rapidly evolving technologies while maintaining robust oversight. And to the next slide, finally, I would like to highlight a particularly significant development of the region. In December 2025, Malaysia's Department of Islamic Development, JAKIM, issued a landmark fatwa stating that cultivated meat can be halal provided certain conditions are met. This is also in line with the IIFA resolution, which was issued in May 2025, as well as the MUIS fatwa, which was issued in February 2024. And the conditions are similar, that the source of the cells, the method of slaughter should be in accordance to Sharia, and the halal status of all growth media and biological components needs to be assessed. And this ruling is important, not only for Malaysia, but as a global signal that religious and ethical considerations can be addressed through clear, science-based criteria rather than treated as barriers by default. To conclude, what we are seeing across APAC and globally is a shift from novelty to normalization. Alternative proteins are increasingly embedded within national industrial strategies, public R&D systems, and regulatory frameworks with growing precedent. The challenge and opportunity ahead lies in regional coordination, regulatory capacity building, and continued dialogue between policymakers, regulators, and the ecosystem. With that, I'll pause here and hand over the floor to Peter Yu for a fireside chat with Dr. Lisa Kelly, who's a director at New Foods team for Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Anchor, for a great presentation, and Happy New Year, everybody. I hope you have a good start of the year. It's great to see so many people on the chat. I think we have a really great session today. And also thank you, Kalisa, Anchor, Dean, and everybody from GFI to putting this together. And if you have any questions throughout the fireside chat, you can put it in the chat box or the Q&A chat box as well. There's two. I'll try to look at that throughout. But anyways, right now we have a fireside chat. It's called Navigating Regulatory Compliance for Cultivated Meat Seafood. Cultivated meat seafood industry is really a massive agent in the creation of a sustainable future for coming generations. And since 2020, we have 10 regulatory approvals issued worldwide, with one in Australia and New Zealand. So in today's fireside chat, we will delve right into the regulatory compliance for cultivated meat seafood and the need to build a forward-looking regulatory landscape rooted in science and in collaboration. Myself, I am Peter Yu. I'm the program director of the APAC Society for Cellular Agriculture. We are an industry think tank based in Singapore, but serve here in the wider APAC region. We work very actively on regulation and policy. But more importantly, we have with us Dr. Lisa Kelly, who is the director of the New Foods team at the Food Standard Australia New Zealand, FSANZ. And Lisa really, she has been worked in the food regulatory space for over 25 years. As I mentioned, she's the director of the New Food section at FSANZ, where she has the responsibility for overseeing the work programs focused on cell culture food, GM food, and other novel foods. And Lisa is recognized as an international expert on GM foods safety assessment and has extensive experience representing the Australian government on biotech matters, both Codex and OECD. So thank you, Lisa, for having us. Do share a little bit more about yourself, perhaps, to the audience.
Sure, and thank you for the introduction, Peter, and hello, everyone. It's really good to be here, and I'm really excited about the conversation today. Tell you a little bit more about myself. Well, I actually originally came from CSIRO. So my expertise was actually originally in plant biotechnology. And I moved over into FSANZ very early in my career. So I've spent most of my career in FSANZ. And I've had the good fortune to be involved in some really exciting developments, both in terms of being around when the GM Food Codex Safety Assessment Guidelines were being developed, and of course now this new wave of cellular agriculture products coming through. So it's a very exciting time, I think, globally, and it's a very hot topic for us in particular in Australia and for our stakeholders.
Thank you, Lisa. And with that, I think go right into the questions, or maybe I'll give you some preamble to the question. But since you've been working with Singapore Food Agency in the past for WOW's cross-country approval. So this is exciting because not only does it save time for the companies, it allows for regulators to leverage on each other's strength to complete the dossier evaluation. But the industry view this as a very, very important milestone. So the question is, drawing lessons from that partnership, how can we enhance international collaboration? And could there be a pathway for mutual recognition or partial data bridging in the future?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what we can do right now is just to be having lots of conversations with each other and sharing the information and sharing experiences. It's still very early days in the development of these products and their assessment and regulatory approval. It's a very steep learning curve for a lot of the agencies. And I think that exchange of information, discussion of issues as they arise, and those just sharing those experiences is very important. It gives us opportunities to collaborate in various ways, but I think it also helps us harmonise in terms of how we actually approach our assessments, which I think is also a very important component. In terms of mutual recognition, I think there certainly is a potential for that to happen. Mutual recognition is not necessarily something that's can be done overnight. It requires quite a bit of negotiation. And so I see that as definitely something that we could be aiming for in the future, but I think it is definitely more in the future and not something that we're necessarily able to do right now. But I think there's certainly right now, and this is something that FSANZ is very interested in, is exploring the possibility of more collaborative work and the possibility of shared assessments, which I think can at least introduce some efficiencies for companies in particular in terms of, preparation of dossiers and going through the regulatory process, but also efficiencies for the agencies as well. And we have experience with that in the GM food space with Health Canada, and we're certainly open to just, entering into similar arrangements in the cell-cultured food space.
Thank you, Lisa. And maybe as a follow-up question, maybe you can share a little bit more on the, efficiency. So you have any sort of specific takes on that, any first impressions?
Just on the shared assessment side? Yeah. I think the efficiency comes from a number of places. I think it's reducing the duplication that can occur, and we saw that with GM foods. Many different agencies were assessing the same foods, arriving at the same conclusions. I think if we can be confident and happy that we're approaching assessments in the same way, there is space there to reduce that duplication that can occur. And I think it also can lead to synchronization of approvals, which can be important for trade, and also just reducing the time it takes for products to go to market.
Excellent. And moving on, so on FSANZ's end, the role of animal testing is not a mandated requirement for novel foods, and this goes back to 2007. So for the cultivated meat and seafood industry, animal-based testings are in contradiction many a time with the values of the industry. We also know that it's costly, and there are ways to conduct, safety evaluation for cultivated meat seafood products without it being a requirement. So the first question here is that from FSANZ's perspective, what are the most common shortcomings in NAM's, data packages submitted for novel food and cultivated meat when it comes to, toxicological aspects, and how does FSANZ integrate NAM-generated data with a weight of evidence approach, especially when traditional in vivo data are limited or absent? So do you have any precedents?
Okay, so FSANZ, we actually, as you alluded to, we actually use for a lot of our assessments, we use approaches that don't involve a lot of animal testing, and we're very comfortable with that for a lot of these types of products. Obviously, we've been doing it very early on, all through our work with GM foods, and we're also now applying that approach to cell-cultured foods. And I think one of the most common issue we run into with companies when they submit dossiers to us that are relying on non-animal methods is they often are not going into enough detail in terms of the arguments that they're making, and in terms of the strength of their safety narrative. And often it's not supported with the documentation that we require. When we're doing an assessment, we have to be confident that the methods that are used, whether they're in vitro methods, the various analytical methods, the bioinformatic methods, that those are validated approaches. So we need that assurance. We need, there's a whole host of documentation that we require. So the most common reason for us to stop the clock and go back for more information is usually to ask companies for that additional supporting information that they just haven't provided in the original dossier that's sent to us. Now, you might
Lisa.
have to remind me about the next part of that question, Peter.
Let me check my sheet. So yeah, how does FSANS integrate NAM generated data with a weight of evidence approach, especially when traditional individual data are limited or absent?
Yeah, well, as I said, this is something we commonly do, not just for GM foods and cell cultured foods. Also, it's for a number of years now, we've been applying non-animal approaches for the assessment of enzymes, so that we were relying on primarily in vitro and bioinformatic types of approaches. And I think it comes down to just recognizing that no single study by itself, and this includes an animal toxicity study, is going to tell you everything about the safety of a food or give you absolute assurance about the safety of a food. So it's the totality of the evidence. And so it comes down to, how you consider the totality of the evidence, what weight you give to the different parts of that evidence, and therefore how confident you then are that you any kind of concerns or questions have been fully addressed and covered through all those individual pieces of evidence. So it does require an element of judgment, for sure. And these assessments are always case by case. So but it's becoming more routine with a lot of our assessments now. We actually don't, in terms of new approach methodologies or non-animal methods, we actually don't have a formal kind of roadmap that, like some other agencies have, like FDA, where they're intending to change over to those, primarily to those approaches by a certain period of time. So we don't have anything in place like that, but we certainly are very open to receiving dossiers that have those newer types of methods.
Yeah, and I think you sort of touched upon that just right now, but how aligned is FSANS, with the current thinking on NAMs, cultivated meat, with other regulators, EFSA, FDA, SFA, and so on? And where do you see sort of key differences emerging here? And are there any conversation among different regulators about this specific topic?
There's certainly conversation that's happening in this particular area, not just on cell cultured food, but across all kind of in the food safety assessment side, in food additives and particularly around in the chemical space as well. Look, my impression from the engagement we've had with our other agencies who are doing these assessments, I think we're actually on the non-animal approaches. I think we're pretty aligned. I'm not seeing any major differences emerging at this point. Whether that happens in the future, I'm not sure. But we as I said, we are having lots of conversations about this, and as I said earlier, I think that's really important for us to remain and continue to be harmonised in this. So I'm not anticipating that there will be major divergences or differences, but we'll see.
Perfect. Okay, and I think we move on to I have two questions remaining, and these are a little bit more broader in topic. So, how do you see your agency's priorities evolving as cultivated food and fermentation technology scale? Are there any regulatory updates that stakeholders may anticipate this year or in the future?
Okay. So our priorities in this area, as many of you would know, we when we were assessing the VALS quail application, we used that opportunity to actually introduce an entirely new regulatory framework for these products, separate to our existing novel food regulations. But to date, we actually have only assessed and approved one product, which was the quail. We're currently in the assessment of a second product, which is Gourmet's duck. But it's a very new regulatory framework, and we introduced that to provide additional certainty and clarity for this particular sector. But I think a priority will be, once we have assessed a number of additional products, is to then review that to see if that framework is actually fit for purpose and whether there's improvements that could be made, particularly in terms of improving whether the regulatory approach can be streamlined and be made more efficient, so that there's a quicker path to market. So that would be the sort of the medium-term priority that we would have. More immediately for this year, we're currently doing work on developing specific data requirements for cell-cultured meat products. We do have data requirements already in place for novel foods generally, but we're hearing feedback from the sector that it's not very clear in terms of the cell-cultured food dossiers what we specifically need for those assessments. So what we're planning to do this year is to provide clearer guidance on the types of data we expect to see in those packages, which we think will should help provide greater certainty and clarity for companies who want to get an approval in Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you, Lisa. Can I say just very quickly, how are we on time?
No, I think we are good. We should be able to take one or two questions from the...
Okay. I have a question here, Dr. Kelly. So we are at a critical stage for the transformation of food tech from a business and financial point of view. I'm not an advocate of moving fast and breaking things. However, the pace of regulatory agencies to adjust to these new techs is detrimental to the future of food tech. So are regulators aware of this dire situation?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the last part of that question. So
I think the question is more framing on the pace of the regulatory development vis-a-vis the development of the industry, and what is from a regulatory perspective, your take on maybe the disparity between the two, what we're seeing here, if that clarifies it.
There is a disparity. I mean, things are moving very fast, and I think it's well known that regulatory systems can struggle to keep up with those changes. We're very conscious of that, which is why we do have a lot of interest in looking at ways within our current regulatory frameworks to become more efficient and more streamlined, so that the regulatory process itself is not an impediment to innovation. We certainly have had feedback from some of our stakeholders that it's just taking too long to get approvals, it's too costly, there's not clarity on what data is required and all of those sorts of things. So we're very aware of some of the issues. Some are more easier to fix than others, but certainly we think if one way to address that, not the only way, and it won't address it completely, but certainly greater collaboration and things like mutual recognition pathways, or at least mutual acceptance of other agencies' assessments and those sorts of things could go some way to addressing that issue. But I think it is a challenge for a lot of governments to actually have regulatory systems that are agile enough to deal with these new developments in a way that's not impeding the developments.
Thank you, Lisa. And one question here is about cost. Maybe you can share a little bit more about the cost structure for SENS and how much does it cost now to apply to get regulatory approval?
So It actually comes as quite a surprise to some of the companies who apply to us that we do operate under a cost recovery system. And the cost recovery system applies in particular to companies who will, once an approval is given, will have or will derive an exclusive capturable commercial benefit. So it will go exclusively to the company who applied for that approval. It won't be a general benefit that applies. So the cost recovery framework works on the basis of us at the beginning of the assessment process estimating what we think the number of hours it will take to complete the assessment, and there's chargings worked out on the basis of those hours, and there's a scale. So for very simple assessments, obviously they're a lot cheaper than more complex assessments. The cell cultured food applications tend to fall into the higher end of the scale, and we're looking at costs 100,000 Australian dollars plus for an assessment at this point in time. Over time, as we become more familiar with these types of products and we're able to introduce, because of that familiarity, we're able to introduce or simplify some of the assessment approaches, the number of hours and therefore the cost can come down. And certainly in a shared assessment scenario, which we found with our GM food work with Health Canada, where each Health Canada and FSANZ take it in turns to do GM assessments, that can significantly, if we're using a Health Canada assessment, that can significantly reduce our charging for approval in Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you. And the final question is surrounding advice. So, what advice would you give to cutlet meat and seafood companies who are looking to submit their dossier or are in the midst of preparing the dossier for submission?
Just come and talk to us. Email us, get on the phone. We're very approachable. We're happy to have conversations, both pre-application discussions. We also offer a free service where we will provide feedback on a draft dossier, which can help avoid lengthy stop clocks, for example, during assessment because there's data that's missing. And also because we are very transparent, previous assessments are published on our website, a full detailed assessment, obviously not confidential information. So I'd also encourage people to look at previous assessments on our website, which gives an idea of the types of information that we're assessing and how we're assessing it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly, for being with us today and sharing your very, very valuable insights. And thank you. And over to you, Kalisa.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dr. Lisa. It was indeed a very informative fireside chat. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kalisa. I'm the Senior Project Manager of the APAC Society for Cellular Agriculture. So in this segment of the webinar, we'll move into the expert commentary on a new publications for cultivated foods with the lead authors, Dr. Kim from Bureau Advisors and also Dr. Fernando from Atova Regulatory Consulting. So before we get into that, I would just like to quickly set the scene. So just a brief intro of APAC SA. We are a key platform in the Asia Pacific region with member companies to drive the advancement of cellular agriculture products such as cultivated meat and seafood. And as a trusted organization, we work on 3 focus areas with each anchored by a special project that brings together the industry, regulators, researchers to advance the scientific and also regulatory coherence for novel and sustainable food technologies. And of course, one of these projects is the APAC Regulatory Coordination Forum mentioned by Uncle earlier in his presentation. So we signed an MOU with 15 participants across 10 APAC countries in 2023 to outline the problems and also to provide recommendations on the issues that's being faced by regulators and also the cultivated food industry. And in 2024, we issued 2 white papers on cell line development as well as cell culture media components. So these resources were developed together with regulatory and technical experts And the goal here is to better help the industry, regulators, and also researchers to understand what are the current gaps where regulatory coordination is required. And this year, the forum developed a scientific opinion paper on animal toxicological studies for the safety assessment of cultivated foods. And this project actually came as a request by a food safety agency to understand the scientific relevance of alternative non-animal approach to support their risk assessment for cultivated food products. And globally, we are seeing this movement from leading regulatory bodies in adopting the 3R principles for food safety assessment. And this is because non-animal-based testing methods are increasingly being valued for the reasons that they can provide more relevant, specific, timely, humane solutions for food safety evaluation, which was also mentioned by Dr. Lisa. And so the objective of this review really is to critically evaluate whether in vivo toxicological studies are appropriate for the assessment of cultivated food products, particularly in light of alternative non-animal-based testing methods. All right, now let's get into the exciting part of the webinar. Again, today with us, we have lead authors of the paper, Dr. Kimberly and Dr. Fernando. Kim and Fernando, may I have you guys introduce yourself to the audience, with Kimberly going first?
Thank you very much, Kalisa. Really appreciate this opportunity to join you all here today. So my name is Kim Ong. I am a toxicologist with Vireo Advisors, and we are a scientific and regulatory advisory firm working with alternative protein companies and partners to conduct safety assessments and secure approvals. But we also work in a number of these collaborative type projects, like with the APAC SCA, where we try to advance the field of safety in the alternative protein space. So we worked with GFI APAC to develop the safety assessed media ingredient list. We run workshops as part of the Cultured Meat Safety Initiative with New Harvest. And we do a number of other collaborative projects to really develop and publish methods and data to demonstrate the safety of novel foods and other sustainable bio-based products. So thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Fernando?
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kalisa. My name is Fernando. I work as a regulatory scientist and toxicologist at Atoba Regulatory Consulting, which is a consultancy based in Barcelona. And me personally, I've been working with novel foods, both in research and regulation for almost 10 years. And now in my role as in Atoba Regulatory Consulting, we work with different clients providing regulatory advice to get their novel food dossier, including several cultivated meat dossier, into the market, working with different jurisdictions. And we're also very active in working in different research projects, for example, from Horizon Europe, in terms of alternative or new developed technologies, sustainable products, and so on. And very happy to be part of this project. And I invite the audience to read the manuscript after the webinar.
Yes, so we do have a preprint available online already. So please do check that publication out later. So thank you, Dr. Fernando, and of course, Dr. Kimberly, for being here and engaging in this webinar. So, in the paper itself, I don't think everyone here on the call knows, but all 10 cultivated food approvals across the globe did not require the use of animal testing. And this is really exciting because, as we have outlined in the paper, there are established methods and also NAMS model to address the potential hazards for cultivated foods. So perhaps for Dr. Kimberly, some countries that we see, they still require mandated animal tests on whole foods because the product itself is considered novel. So from a practical standpoint, what approach should companies, especially such novel food companies, take when presenting safety data in these types of jurisdiction?
Yes, so I think that the first point to acknowledge is that there is a regulatory reality that not all jurisdictions are at the same level of acceptance when it comes to NAMs. And many animal testing requirements stem from kind of legacy frameworks or kind of what different regulatory agencies have been used to historically. And we do also have to acknowledge that regulators have a real clear responsibility to protect public health, and industry also wants the same. So I believe that kind of the safety assessment of cultivated foods, which is a very controlled process where we know all the inputs and outputs, this creates an opportunity to maybe re-examine some of the assumptions behind kind of this traditional testing paradigms in these animal tests. So from a practical standpoint, to kind of answer your question, kind of to repeat what Dr. Kelly said, companies should adopt a clear weight of evidence mindset and kind of move away from thinking that like one test can only one test can demonstrate safety. So practically, this does mean that companies will need to collect a lot of different information and put it all together, rather than like relying on one test. And NAMs really are kind of more effective when they're used as like supporting data or part of an integrated package, rather than just like a standalone replacement. So a really strong safety dossier will bring together detailed product and process characterization, of course, a description of the manufacturing controls and quality systems, a realistic exposure and consumption scenario, so you have to account for all the different inputs, and then perhaps using some targeted NAMs that address, for example, some like plausible or product specific hazards if those are identified. So you got to use them very smartly. And then something we kind of addressed in the paper, it's also really important to talk about kind of the scientific relevance of animal testing for cultivated foods. So whole food animal studies are often kind of lack the sensitivity for like subtle effects or mechanistic effects, and we don't really think that these are suited for products that are really highly characterized and produced under tightly controlled conditions. So for example, if you get a toxic outcome from one of these in vivo tests, you see something adverse, you see something bad happening, it's really difficult to determine what exactly caused that issue when you are using a whole food. We can already more suitably identify the issues based on this extensive knowledge of the whole manufacturing process and inputs and outputs. And we know that most companies are already using like food grade inputs that are already present in conventional foods or already intrinsic components of meat. So yeah, we maybe don't want to rely on these kind of whole food tests. So when engaging regulators, I would say that companies should really explain why animal data is not going to add meaningful or like decision relevant value. You know, as noted too, conducting these tests across the whole industry would really cost a lot of money for like little value in return to help us better understand the hazards. So just a little bit of practical advice, as noted, early and proactive engagement is really critical. Companies should really engage with regulators before the submission, after all the data is collected and the dossier is finalized, because during these pre-submission meetings, you can talk to the regulators and explain kind of your overall testing rationale, your strategy, the weight of evidence, and walk the regulators through like why NAMs are selected and validated, and you can kind of align on like what are acceptable endpoints. So really just, yeah, you can like reference international precedents. Yes, all these other precedents haven't used animal testing, but really it's important to frame it in a weight of evidence approach so that it supports your like sound scientific safety assessment, because that is yeah, appropriate in this case. So just kind of final point here, like transparency and documentation is really key to building trust, really documenting like why your test was chosen, what hazard it addresses, what uncertainty there is, and like, of course, as Dr. Kelly mentioned about this, like you really have to document why that test is suitable and like why that test is, or how that test is invalidated. So really, really important. Yeah, I'll there and then let's see what other questions and points come up.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Kimberly. I think those are really great points. And I think it's also reassuring that we are seeing more regulators either using or exploring the idea of NAMs for food safety. So for example, we have EFSA TK platform, and also last year, WHO collaborated with Singapore's NTU to explore NAMs for food safety. So those are really, really positive developments. But of course, we also know that adoption for NAMs actually tends to be slower when it comes to regulatory acceptance. So perhaps for Dr. Fernando, you know, how can regulators better integrate these scientific evidence into safety frameworks? Or what types of information do you actually hope to see, you know, when regulators update their novel framework when it comes to NAMs?
Okay, yes. Thanks for the question. I really think that and it's also aligned with what Lisa said at the beginning of the webinar, that regulatory agencies should be more involved in the development of protocols and methodologies, and kind of understand or engage with the applicants to understand the reasoning or basically why the NAMs or the specific study is reliable and it makes sense in terms of safety. It's not just because every study is like every result doesn't mean necessarily that it's linked to food safety outcome. So that's the most important thing. So basically, I think that the first thing should be that scientists developing these new assessment methodologies should be guided by those people who ultimately are going to accept them or not, let's say in that way, which is basically a common change, not specific for NAMs, but for dossiers in general. I mean, we already see NAMs being accepted, as you said. For example, we discussed about the genotoxicity in vitro test, but there are some others that are not, or there's some low acceptability or reluctance still because they're not validated. And I think this is an important method because some agencies believe that only validated method can be applied for food safety, which makes sense, but then it takes several years to validate a method. So that's where the communication between scientists or applicants and regulators comes. It's like to make them understand. And that's where also transparency that was mentioned by Lisa and by Kim. Like, I think it's very important, the transparency in the methodology, the protocols that are developed to understand why this is relevant. And of course, we don't have to see NEMS as a replacement or not yet, or not for every case, but as Kim said, just it's an integration in the existing assessment paradigm, like a weight of evidence approach. But I think basically that at this point, also risk assessors should be more open or more flexible into what's now in their guidance, or develop new guidance to kind of adapt to adapt to new approaches and to kind of understand why this is relevant and how can this really be part of or be integrated in the food safety. And so at the end, that would allow to a not more flexible interpretation of the regulatory framework, because we have to understand that, as Kim said, that the main priority is the public health, but still we need to also consider costs and times and innovation and other factors. So in relation to the second question, so what I would expect to see in upcoming novel food regulatory frameworks, for example, I would say explicit acceptance criteria for NAMs, for example, like what can be used, for example, the in vitro test for genotoxicity, but then what is still not ready to be used for a food safety assessment, or what can be used as supportive evidence, or kind of like you need this, but also another piece of evidence in order to have a better overview or a complete outcome of the safety of a specific endpoint. And then I think it's very useful, for example, and to have practical examples. And I think we already have several precedents, for example, this dossier that are already authorized. So that's also important to see how regulators are accepting that, and to make sure that this is not just something that happened once, that we continue developing and we continue being more open to new approaches and new methodologies that will come, because at the end, that's also something that NAMs are constantly evolving, and we see different tools coming always. And I think this is also an important aspect, and also Lisa said how tricky can be, which is the alignment on this aspect about different regulatory agencies, which makes sense, but it's also important for the applicants, because at the end, most of the applicants, or a lot of them, they're not going to apply for a specific jurisdiction. They have a more worldwide view of the market. So at the end, it's also complicated because you need to generate different data for different jurisdictions. So that's also important. And again, not specifically for NAMs, but in general. So I would say, as a summary, clear indications of regulatory needs, like what do you need, or what can be used for regulatory purposes, and what are the opportunities for scientific developments on the topic.
All right, thank you, Dr. Fernando. Those are, hopefully with the regulators on the call, they can really consider the different aspects of NAMs when it comes to safety dossier assessments, right? So I do have one question from the crowd. The question reads, do you foresee if the US FDA ends the self-affirming GRAS route that it could influence the EU regulatory progress and also Asia Pacific's willingness to approve more cultivated meat or establish regulatory frameworks for it? Maybe we can go with Dr. Kim. If not, Fernando can chime in as well.
I think, well, so the self-affirmed grassroots, so I don't know if I quite understand the question, but so regulatory agencies each do their own, at this point, there isn't really, so even though there's maybe some agencies have some kind of sharing mechanisms and some collaborative work, there's no like formal mechanisms to accept, for example, mutual recognition, as Dr. Kelly mentioned earlier. If it's accepted in one place, then it's automatically accepted somewhere else. So I think the kind of closing of one pathway in one jurisdiction doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to change the pathway somewhere else.
Okay. Dr. Fernando, perhaps anything that you would like to share?
Not really. I agree with what Kim said. Like, I think that at this point they're independent, and we know how different agencies are more strict than some others. So I don't think that just because there's some flexibility in one jurisdiction, we can expect also other jurisdictions to act the same way, because the standards might be different or the methodologies used are different.
All right. Yeah, that's good points as well. So just one more question from the crowd before we head to our concluding question. So the question reads, can NAMs actually replace animal toxicity testing? Do NAMs actually take less time and also cost less for companies? And if so, how much? So I think the how much is a little bit tricky to answer, since different companies that have different novel processes would require different NAMs, right? But generally, overall, how do you see NAMs replacing animal tox studies?
Fernando, do you want to start this one?
For me, okay.
Yeah.
No, I think that at this point, I mean, we've seen cases in which we didn't need animal studies, for example, for cultivated food products. But as Kim said, and as also Lisa said, like, I think it's part of the weight of evidence, and it's very a case-by-case basis. I don't think there's a definite answer for the questions. Like, we need also to acknowledge that there might be cases in which an animal study might be needed, but it's well, that's another story, and how to design and what's the test item used needs to be used there. But yeah, I think that now it's still in a very early stage, and it helps, but I don't think we need to consider NAMs always as a replacement, but more like a complementary piece of evidence at this point.
And I'll just quickly add, I did see a question here to ask what NAMs are. So sorry if we didn't say that earlier, but it is like new approach methodologies is what NAM stands for. And they're basically non-animal tools. So they can be in vitro, in silico, just different approaches to do safety assessment without doing in vivo testing, animal testing. And yeah, I agree that so NAMs, as multiple NAMs, may answer the questions about if you identify a specific hazard, or if you might think there might be a genotoxic effect. They can kind of cover different types of mechanisms, but at the moment there's no one in vitro test or in silico test that replaces an animal test directly. And so that's why we keep on talking about the weight of evidence. So it means the weight of evidence means collecting evidence and then putting it all together to create a supporting story using these NAMs.
All right,
and generally, individually, the NAMs are quite a bit less costly than, for example, one in vivo test. But as mentioned, especially at this phase, we are collecting a lot of information for a dossier, and so I don't know if anyone's done the math to add it all up yet to compare directly.
Yeah, we might be able to hopefully do that in the future. So in the publication itself, Dr. Kim and Dr. Fernando actually outlined individually what are the specific types of tests that companies can, approach using NAMs first instead of doing a animal tox test on whole foods. So if you read the paper in detail, we actually also include a case study around how, the NOEL doesn't really make sense when you were to derive the appropriate amount for consumption, when it comes to animal tests, right? All right, so we just have a few more minutes left. So perhaps a final question for both of our panelists here. What's one piece of advice that you would give to cultivated meat and food companies who are looking to utilize NAMs in their dossier submission? I know Dr. Kim has covered quite a few of these already earlier. So perhaps just one advice.
Okay, yeah, the main advice is earlier engagement. And then I guess in general, because there are still some regulatory agencies that require or are still requesting in vivo studies for cultivated meat, I think companies do need to plan for some strategic flexibility. So even though you can have a core scientific package that will go to will be the same for different regions, you will need some flexibility. But if we keep on all going to talk to these regulators and kind of demonstrating that we can use this weighted evidence approach, perhaps we can kind of build confidence and kind of support the evolution of these novel food frameworks. So companies just kind of not think you're just an applicant, but you're like actively contributing to like future regulatory norms.
Yeah, agree. Dr. Fernando?
Yeah, I would say the same, like to do a strategic use of the NAMs, like to make it part of the weight of evidence and not like consider them as an isolated tool to demonstrate the food safety. So it's kind of like to reduce the uncertainty rather than reducing or avoiding the animal testing, which I mean, it's kind of related, but like the idea would be to reduce the uncertainty about the safety, the hazards that the product might have. And then I would also say to avoid overclaiming the outputs of the NAMs, because sometimes we see results from tools, but the applicants, they don't know how that translates into a food safety state or information on the product. So I think that's also important to be realistic on what NAMs can do and cannot do. Like we cannot assume that, as Kim said, like one tool, it serves for everything. Like specific NAMs can have an outcome, but then this outcome, we need to correlate it to the food safety of the product itself. I think that's also very important.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kimberly. Thank you, Dr. Fernando. They both have joined us from the US and Europe, respectively. So it's really great to have them here despite the time difference. So for the audience, we hope that you found today's topic innovative and engaging. So while we have come to the end of the webinar, Fred, as Anka mentioned earlier, it's recorded. It will be uploaded to GFI's YouTube channel and also distributed to all of the participants here. So, if you would like to be involved in the APAC Regulatory Coordination Forum, who is the host for today's webinar, please either reach out to me or Anka. All right, that concludes the webinar. Have a great day ahead, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah.